Hello, and welcome back to Into the Verse, Episode 3. In this episode, we'll be looking at linking different devices through Verse and the benefits of doing that as opposed to linking those devices through UEFN. So to start off with, I'm going to assume that you have a rudimentary understanding of how to link devices in UEFN rather. In this case, what I have here is a simple trigger. I haven't changed any options on the trigger. I've just left it exactly as it comes in, and I've made an item granter with everything the same except I gave it a chug jug to grant. And lastly, in the grant item function of the user options, I've chosen this trigger that I just put down, and I've chosen the function onTriggered, and that will be hooked up to the grant item. So we should expect that when my character runs over this trigger, I should be given a chug jug. We can go ahead and check that in Fortnite right now. Again, this is not using Verse. This is just using event binding from UEFN. So we get our print statements up there that we haven't removed yet. And we should expect that as I run over this trigger, I indeed get a chug jug. Perfect. So let's figure out how to do this in Verse and kind of discuss why we would want to do it in Verse as opposed to through the editor. So to start off with, I'm going to unlink these objects, these devices in UEFN, so we can make sure that all the effects that we expect to see are happening in Verse instead. So to do that, I will simply delete this element right here. So now this trigger and this granter are in no way linked. Nothing should happen when I stand on this trigger other than it will try to send out an event, but of course nothing is listening to that event, so nothing will happen. I'm not going to show that just because I think that should be expected. I'm going to push my changes though before we start writing code, just so that these changes take effect. Although I believe we're going to have to use the regular push changes later in this episode. So from there, let's jump straight into Verse and discuss how to start linking these. All right, in Visual Studio Code, the first thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to remove these print statements that we made in the first episode, I believe. We know this works. We know that our onBegin is firing as soon as the level starts. That's something we discussed in the last episode as well. These print statements just don't need to be here. They don't serve a purpose of any kind. Now, as you can see, I have a blank space in our onBegin, and if you are still this is something I forgot to mention in the last episode, but if you are using the colon method in the white space instead of curly brackets like I am, if you have a function such as onBegin and it's got no content, right, it's got nothing in it, essentially that's what I have here, except I have curly brackets denoting where the start and the end of the function is. However, if you don't have the curly brackets, what will end up happening is you'll have blank space and it will complain. The compiler will tell you have an error, and that's because it's looking at onBegin and it's expecting some text under it, some kind of it has to do something. And in this case, it's happy to do nothing because I'm telling it, hey, look inside of these and do nothing. However, if you're just using white space, it will expect something at the very least. So if you are using white space and you would like to suppress an error, what you can do in the meantime is so it would look like this, right? Is how yours would look. I can suppress this by just doing curly brackets here, or pretty much anywhere underneath. I can do them here. I can even do them on the same line. This will just tell it, hey, stop complaining for now. Just look at these curly brackets and be happy. Now I'm going to keep mine as I had it, just like this, so we can start writing in there once we're to that point. Okay, so a few steps in order to get our devices linked up through Verse and have them having our trigger fire our item granter. In order to do that, first we have to expose the both the trigger device and the item granter inside of our code so that we can access them via the editor. So to start with, I'm going to put a new line at the top of our class here on line 6 for me. And I'm going to write, I'm actually going to increase my font just one size, just so it's a little bit easier on the eyes. I'm also going to make my Explorer go away, so it's just our file here. So I'm going to start by typing out with an @ which is holding shift and hitting 2. I'm going to type editable. and I'll discuss exactly what this means in just a few seconds here. But for now, I'm going to name our trigger in code, right? I want to be able to refer to our trigger device in code, and I want to refer to it by a name that I can recall, and it's easy to understand, right? I could just write trigger as the name, and that's fine. And our code right now is not going to be super complicated, so this will make sense. However, I like to be as verbose as possible. I want to write out the name of my object so that anyone who's reading this at any point, right, can just jump in and say, oh, this is obviously the trigger to grant an item. All right, that's its only purpose, in this case at least. So I'm going to write item granter trigger. That's my name for it. It's a little long, and some people will say, well, it doesn't need to be that long. You could theoretically have it be one letter, and that's fine, but that doesn't mean anything to me or anyone who's reading it in the future. So I want to be very verbose. Item granter trigger, and now we have to, so this is our name, and now we have to tell verse what it is, right? So we've named it, however, it still doesn't know, what this thing is. It's just a name. So to define to define the type of something, we use a single colon. This colon basically says, hey, this is the name of the thing, and everything afterwards is the type of the thing. And in this case, it needs to be a trigger device, right? It needs to be the actual trigger that is inside of Fortnite. So to do that, we're going to type in trigger device, just like that. And then last thing we need to do is, and we'll get into this more in the future, but essentially with these creative device classes, they require us to initialize everything we want to access. So even though we will assign this trigger device inside of the editor to our code base, we still need to tell it that it's going to take up some amount of memory, or, I'm not exactly sure what the purpose of the concrete aspect of this is, and we'll talk about what concrete means later. But in order to fulfill that, we're going to do an equals, and I'm going to type exactly what I typed here, which is trigger device with the underscore. Again, classes have this snake case, so lowercase letters, underscores between words. So trigger device, and I'm just going to add 2 curly brackets at the end, and that's going to tell it, hey, make this. Whatever the thing is you're making, that's what these 2 curly brackets mean in the context of classes. So just to run over it one more time, we have this editable keyword, which we'll talk about in just a second. We have the name of the thing we want to reference. In this case, I'm calling it item granter trigger. We use the colon to say, hey, it's a type of, and the type is trigger device, and it's equaling trigger device, because we have to tell it, hey, you have to equal something for now, even though we're going to make it equal something else in just a second. Okay, great. So let's save this before we move on. I'm going to go build verse code. So I'll head to UEFN, verse, build verse code, Control-Shift-B if you want to be quick. And what we'll see if we click on our verse device, the one that we brought in episode 1, we should see a new field appear for us right here. Verse tutorials device, that's the name of our class. And right here we have item granter trigger. This is the exact name that I gave it in code. And as you can see, it says none. And if I do this drop down, it will give me a list of every single trigger device in our world. In this case, we only have the one, so only the one shows up. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And now in code, if I were to, do anything to this item granter trigger, right, it would actually apply to this device in game. Now, we can't do anything with this device right now. However, we're about to see how we can link to the functionality of this through code to get this item granter to spawn an item for us. Oh, and I just glossed over it, but the reason, by the way, that this text and this field is showing up for us, this item granter trigger, is exactly because of this editable keyword. When I put @editable before a name of something inside of a class, I should be more specific, inside of a concrete class, which is something that the creative device, our superclass, is, when we write this editable, it means, hey, it's telling the compiler, hey, show up inside of the editor wherever this thing is. So our verse tutorials device is a class, it can exist in the editor, and we're telling it, hey, make this thing show up in the editor using editable. This editable keyword, by the way, comes from our verse.org/simulation. If I remove this, we can see that unknown identifier editable. Did you forget to specify using this? It's exactly what we did. So we'll Control Z that back in. Okay, cool. Now, as you might have guessed, the next thing we need to do is add another editable, right? We need to be able to spawn the item, to grant the item via the item granter. So let's do that real quick. I'm going to start by doing editable once more time. And I'm going to say this is going to be our chug jug granter. It is going to be of type item granter device, I believe. We can double check that here in a second. And I'm going to equal it to item granter device. Oops, come on, device. And it looks like I was correct there, so that is the correct naming. If you ever need to know what is the correct naming for a device and you're struggling to figure out, is it granter item device? Is it device granter item? We obviously have to be correct with our spelling of these. We can look at the Fortnite digest. So once again, I can control click on one of these to take me to those in the file, or we can open our Explorer in the top left of Visual Studio Code. And here we have a bunch of different digests, right? There's one for Verse, one for Unreal Engine, and one for Fortnite. We're working with Fortnite devices right now, so I'm going to assume that these devices are held inside of this. And if I double click on that, we'll open the file. And from here, I can begin to scroll through thousands of lines to try to find it, but that's not very useful. So instead, I can actually search for things. To search for things inside of the current file you're on, make sure your mouse cursor has clicked inside of the file itself, and then you hold Control and press F. Oops, I think I hit Control T, but if you do Control F, this bar will pop up and it says find. So here I can go ahead and type things in. Now again, we're looking for trigger device and item granter device. So I can go ahead and switch back to this file and type in trigger device. Note trigger device, that's not what I want. I want input trigger device, that's not it either. Here it is, trigger device. Awesome. We can see the different events and functions associated with it, and we'll be looking at one of these events here in just a second. The item granter device is also inside of here. If I do item granter device, there's only one of one. Perfect, here it is. Here are some of the functions that we can call on it, and we'll be using one of these in order to give the item to a player. Okay, so let's go back to our own file here for a second. First tutorials device. Just to show you, I can control click on this. If I control click on item granter device, it takes me right here. Or same thing with trigger device, which is the one we actually want to be looking at, trigger device. Perfect. Okay, so now that we have both our item granter device and we have our trigger device and our item granter device, we need to now tell our program, hey, we want to listen for that triggered event when someone steps on that trigger or however we're triggering it, right? We want to listen to that, and we want to then tell the item granter device, our chug jug granter, to give the item to whatever triggered that. Okay, so there's a few steps here, and I'm going to write these out in pseudocode. First, we're going to do something called subscribe, which is a word we'll be looking at here in a second. We're going to subscribe to triggered event on trigger device. The next thing we want to do is grant item to agent who triggered the device. These are the two main things we need to do. As you see here, I'm using these pound signs to denote that they are just comments. The compiler will ignore these completely. We could leave these in our code forever. It would never affect anything. However, eventually I'll remove these as we do these things. Now, there is one in between here that we technically have to do, which is to write a new function to handle the event. All right, so this is something we haven't done yet, but we'll get to that in just a second. Actually, this is kind of something we need to do first, technically, and I'll show you what I mean. So, first, let's go in order of what we have here. So we want to subscribe, and subscribe basically means Think of a newspaper or like a news site online where you can pay some amount of money to and receive the newspaper or whatever it is every month or whenever a new one's available, right? So, excuse me, if I subscribe to a gaming magazine online, and whenever they publish a new article or they publish a new magazine or whatever, it will send to my email. It'll say, hey, we put one of these out, right? That's essentially subscribing. Same thing on YouTube. You subscribe to a channel. Whenever that channel uploads a video, all of their subscribers are notified, right? So essentially we want to listen to that notification that someone has triggered our item granter device. That's kind of what subscribing means. So to do that, first we need to use the name of our trigger device that we've created, which is, of course, item granter trigger. I'll go ahead and type that out, item granter trigger, right? And now we want to access something inside of this. We want to listen to the on-triggered event. If I go to the Fortnite digest that we were looking at, here's our trigger device, and here's our triggered event. And we have some text, some detail through their comments, signaled when an agent triggers this device, sends the agent that used this device, returns false if there is no agent, and we'll get into what that agent means here in a second. But what we want is this name, triggered event. We want to be able to listen to this. So we'll go back to our code, and I'm going to type out exactly what they have. You can also copy and paste it, but I'm going to type out triggered event. And now the next thing we need to do is to subscribe to this event. How we were just talking about the subscribe. So I can do another dot, and then with a capital S, we do subscribe. And then we're going to open our parentheses. And inside of our parentheses, as you can see here, it's complaining because it expects us to give it some code that it will call whenever this happens. Whenever the triggered event fires, we want to call some of our own code. And in order to do that, we actually need to make our own function, which is this kind of second comment we wrote out here. So let's do that. Under our onBegin function, in a new line, again, make sure your white space, if you're using the colon, is lined up. You want to be inside of Verse Tutorials device, your class, but not inside of your onBegin function. This is a new function we're making. So I'm going to call this onTriggered. You can name it whatever you want, as long as you don't use a name that's already in use. So I'm calling it onTriggered. I know onTriggered is not a name that I'm using in this context, so we're happy to use it here. But I could totally name this whatever I want. I can name it on item granter triggered, whatever we want. But I'm just going to call it onTriggered for now. I don't need to override anything because I'm making a new function, so we don't have to include this override like we did with onBegin. So we can skip straight to the parameters, which are these parentheses. So I'm going to do open close parentheses, and we're going to put something inside of that. But for now, just move on. I'm going to do my colon. I'm going to type in void, and then an equals, and then I'm going to do my curly brackets. And just like that, we've created a new function, right? OnTriggered is a function. It's not going to be called anywhere right now. It's just hanging out. It takes no parameters currently, and it returns nothing or void, right? Void is just means return nothing to anyone. We'll talk about returning and all that in the future as well. So one thing we'll need to do, though, before we can put our onTriggered inside of our parameters here, which is what we want to do, is we need to respect what the event is actually, what data the event is returning to us. Because we need to somehow use that data in order to grant the item to someone, right? We can't just grant an item to no one. That won't work. We have to actually grant it to someone. And we can know who called or who triggered the event by the data that our subscribe call is going to return to us. So if we go back to the Fortnite digest, we can see that inside of its parameters, we have this question mark agent. Now, we'll get into what the question mark means in the future. Essentially, this is called an option or an optional, and it kind of means that something can exist or not exist, but we don't know until we check it. So we'll look into that in the future. For now, all we know is that we are getting an agent back, potentially, and we want to use that agent in order to trigger our item granter. We want to grant an item to a specific player, not to just any player. So in our verse tutorials file, I'm going to add exactly what they have there, except I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call my name of the agent with a capital A. And this, again, this is our name, so we can name anything. We could call it, triggering agent. We could call it blah, whatever we want. I like agent. It's nice and simple. And it is of type, remember the colon means type, and it's going to be of type agent, right? It is an agent, but sometimes we don't know that the agent actually exists in case, let's say a car drives over the trigger or something. That might not be associated with an agent, so we need the question mark. But yeah, we'll get into that in the future. So now we've fulfilled all the prerequisites, and we can actually put our on-triggered functionality into our subscribe call. So if I copy this and paste that into our parentheses, we can see it stops complaining and it's totally happy. And once again, what we're doing here is our item granter trigger. We are saying, hey, your triggered event, I want to subscribe to that. And whenever you have an update, something triggers you, I want to call this code on triggered, which is our code. Now we can do anything we want in here. It doesn't have to be the item granter. We could print something. We could, teleport players. We could do whatever we want. So we are looking to grant an item to the player though. And so in order to do that, we need to use our chug jug granter, right? If we hold control and click on our item granter device to go to that class in Fortnite Digest, we can see that there is a function down here called grant item. It says grants an item to agent. And as you can see here, it takes its parameters here is agent. It wants an agent for us to give it so that it can actually grant the item to that person. So we have the agent. We know that one exists, or well, potentially exists from our triggered event. And now we just need to access that so that we can tell item granter, hey, grant this item to someone. Okay. Now, one thing that we're not going to go too deep into right now, using this question mark, essentially, as I explained before, this is like it maybe contains an agent and it maybe contains nothing. So we just need to check that there is indeed an agent that we can grant an item to. Otherwise, if there is no real agent, we just do nothing, and that's okay. So, in order to do that, we're going to write this thing called an if statement, which we'll go over in future episodes. But the gist of it is anything inside of these parameters, in these parentheses rather, after if, means that if the thing inside of this is true, then we want to do something else. If the things are not inside of this is not true, then we want to skip over. We don't actually want to do anything because, what we thought might happen is not going to happen. So we'll get into, sequential programming and stuff in the future. So first we need to check if this agent actually exists. If this agent is a real agent and not just like a car or something. So in order to do so, we need to say, hey, one other thing I'm going to change real quick here is I'm actually going to rename my agent. Again, we can name this whatever we want, to in agent. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to actually reserve the name agent for when we actually know positively that there's an agent instead of a questionable agent, right? This name is maybe an agent. So we could even call it maybe agent. Now, I don't really like this syntax, but it does make sense, right? This is maybe an agent. So let's first check by getting to making sure that there is an actual agent. To do that, I'm going to do if, and then I'm going to use agent, which is a name I'm giving it, right? Not this name, different name. And I'm going to say if agent is colon equals to maybe agent question mark. What this is saying, hey, look at this object, which is maybe agent right here, and use this question mark to check if there's actually a value inside of it, if there is actually an agent. Because if there is, then make agent, my new object, equal to that. And then we can do some code in here now that we have access to this. Now, again, if there was no actual agent triggering this device because it was triggered in some other way that wasn't tied to a player, this if statement would say, hey, try to make agent equal to whatever the value of this. Oh, there is no value here. Let's skip over. So everything inside of our if statement down here will just be skipped. And that is the functionality we want. Okay, now that we know for sure we have an agent, right? We can use the chug jug granter to grant an item to that player. So I'm going to type in chug jug granter, just how I had it up here. I'm going to do dot, and I can't remember the name of the function I'm trying to call. I can head straight over to Fortnite Digest and find out. Here it is, grant item. Grants an item to an agent. So in this case, I'm going to copy it. You don't need to copy it. You can just type it out if you'd like. Grant item, perfect. And now it's expecting an agent. So we'll go ahead and put our own parentheses here. And the agent we want to pass in is, of course, agent. So we'll do that, agent. So now that all of this is set up, we can go ahead and just run down one more time. We subscribe to the triggered event of the trigger device. We tell it, hey, whenever you're triggered, call this function, which is one we made, on triggered. We check if the agent is actually the thing that called the trigger. And then, if it is, we tell ChugJug Granter to grant the item to that agent. And that's all we're doing. So, essentially, yes, it is a bit more work compared to just hooking things up through UEFN, right? Instead of just plugging things into UEFN and having it work, that's great. However, this allows us way more functionality in the future, because maybe I want to do multiple things with this trigger. Maybe I want to do complex math, or maybe I want to have some deterministic feature where, players are, they switch class, or they switch teams, or points are given to one team and not the other. We can do all of that through code, as opposed to trying to hook all those things up through the editor. Will take a lot longer. So you're saving time in the future by doing a little more work in the present. Let's head back to UEFN and build our code. We've spent far too long in Visual Studio Code, which is just you're bound to happen as you become a more versed programmer. After building my verse code, you can see that a new field popped up in our verse device, ChugJug Granter. I know this is going to be the item granter that I've put in the level, which is this one. Now everything should be ready, right? Everything should be ready to go. We shouldn't have to touch anything else. I'll go ahead and save my project. I'm also going to push changes, and I will be right back once UEFN updates. All right, great. Now that we're back in Fortnite and everything's updated, I'll go ahead and start my game. And we should see the exact same functionality as we saw earlier with the trigger. However, we're doing all of it through verse as opposed to in the editor. So when I step on this, we should see that I get a chug jug. It's exactly what we were expecting, and I think a great point to end the episode here. So thank you so much for watching. This has been episode 3 of Into the Verse. If you're enjoying these episodes and you want to keep learning about programming and verse and UEFN, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. It means a lot. I'm going to keep uploading these for free, I believe. There's no reason to gatekeep this kind of material, which has been a pretty hotly debated topic in the industry right now. I think the more people who get into this, the better. So we're going to see better programming out of everyone if we provide this information. So again, if you like it, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you so much. I'll catch you next time.